I never thought betrayal could arrive in such an ordinary envelope. It was a pale cream one, the kind banks use for formal notices. I found it in my mailbox on a Tuesday morning, tucked between a grocery store flyer and a postcard from the local pharmacy reminding me to get my flu shot. There was no sense of foreboding as I carried it inside, no music in the background to signal that my life was about to shift. The kettle was already on. I set the envelope on the kitchen counter beside the sugar jar and poured myself a cup of Earl Grey. The steam curled in front of my face, familiar and grounding. Only after the first sip did I reach for it. Inside was a 2-page statement from my investment account. The numbers on the page seemed, at first, to blur in the morning light. I thought I was reading them wrong. Perhaps the decimal had shifted, perhaps the column titles had changed. But no, they were what they were. A balance more than $200,000 lower than it had been last quarter. I set my tea down untouched now. The line item descriptions were vague. Transfers, adjustments, authorized allocations. I frowned at the last one. I had made no such authorizations. I reached for my reading glasses, the ones I keep in the second drawer under the dish towels, and scanned again. At the bottom of the page, in small print, it read, "Transactions authorized by secondary account manager, Daniel B. Carter." Daniel, my son. The kitchen felt suddenly colder, the tile under my bare feet leaching away warmth. I tried to tell myself there was an explanation. Maybe he'd moved the money into another account for safekeeping, maybe it was some kind of temporary investment he forgot to mention. But the other part of me, the part that has lived through 73 winters and seen kindness fade into entitlement more than once, knew better. Daniel had asked me to make him a secondary account manager 2 years ago, after my hip surgery. "Just to help with the paperwork while you're recovering, Mom," he'd said, smiling that smile that used to mean safety. He'd been so attentive then, bringing groceries, checking in every day, making tea just the way I liked it. I'd signed the forms without reading too closely. Love makes you do that. I stared at the paper until the numbers began to swim again. The phone sat on the counter. I could have called him. I could have asked him outright what he had done. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I sat down at the small table by the window, the one with the faded floral oilcloth, and looked out at the street. The same maple trees lined the curb, their leaves beginning to crisp at the edges. Across the road, Mrs. Pollard was tending her roses, bending carefully at the waist, her wide straw hat bobbing gently as she worked. Life was still moving in its ordinary way. But I was not in the same place I had been yesterday. When my husband died 12 years ago, I learned that grief does not shout, it whispers. It seeps into your bones quietly until one day you wake up and realize it has rearranged you. Betrayal, I think, is the same. I took another sip of tea, now lukewarm. Daniel had never been a cruel boy. He was soft-spoken, with a gentle way of moving through the world. He used to bring me seashells from the beach when he was little, placing them in my palm like treasures. Somewhere between those small hands and the man who now signed authorized allocations without my consent, something had shifted. Or perhaps I had simply chosen not to see it. I thought of the small ways it had been building. The casual way he'd started talking about streamlining my finances. The times he'd told me not to worry myself about statements or bills. The way he'd rolled his eyes just slightly, when I still insisted on writing my own checks. I had thought it was convenience. I had thought it was care. I set the envelope back on the counter and pushed my chair away from the table. My hands felt steady, but there was a new tightness in my chest. I went to the small desk in the corner of the living room, pulled open the bottom drawer, and took out my old file of bank statements. I have always kept things in order, yellowed pages from decades ago still tucked neatly in their folders. Compared. The pattern was there if you looked for it. Small amounts, then larger ones. A slow, careful siphoning, as if he had been testing the waters before taking the plunge. In the hallway, a framed photograph caught my eye. Daniel at 9 years old, grinning with a gap-toothed smile, holding up the fish he'd caught with his father on one of our last trips together. His cheeks flushed with pride, his hair sticking up in tufts from the sea wind. I lifted the frame, studied his boyish face, and wondered how many steps there were between that moment and this one. The kettle clicked off again. I hadn't realized I'd turned it back on. I poured the remaining water into the sink and watched the steam curl upward, dissipating into nothing. I knew then that I would not be confronting him. Not yet. Confrontation invites performance. And I didn't want to see him perform sincerity for me. Not when the truth was sitting so plainly in my hands. Instead, I would do what I have always done best. I would observe. I would gather my own quiet proof. And when the time came, I would decide. Not in anger, not in haste, but in full possession of myself. I set the photo back on the wall and straightened it. Then I went to the closet, took down the small leather-bound notebook I'd used during my husband's illness, and wrote the date at the top of the first blank page. Under it I wrote one sentence. Daniel withdrew $217,436 without consent. It looked different in ink. Real. Unignorable. Outside, the mail truck rumbled down the street. Somewhere in the distance, a gull cried, the sound carrying on the wind from the bay. I closed the notebook, set it beside the envelope, and washed my teacup. The kitchen was quiet again, but I knew the silence had changed. I would not chase the money. Not yet. But I would not let them take the rest of me. The week unspooled quietly, like a spool of thread finally admitting it was almost done. On Wednesday I made soup the way I always have. Celery softening first, onions sweating low and patient, carrots added only when the pot had already learned to listen. I took comfort in the choreography of it. Settled taste. Salt like a small kindness. While it simmered, I set the leather notebook beside the stove and noted the time and temperature like a nurse charting a pulse. It wasn't the soup I was measuring. At noon, Daniel texted. Stopping by tonight. Thought we could review your paper piles. Oh, you know I'm happy to help. The wordle looked strange next to me. It felt like a borrowed shirt, too tight in the shoulders. I wrote back. 7 is fine. I'll make soup. I ate a small bowl standing at the counter, then washed it carefully, as if the dish itself might be part of the record. After lunch I walked to the bay. The tide was low. Ribbed lines of wet sand shone like the backs of sleeping fish. A boy ran past me, dragging a net behind him, leaving a snake of water in his wake. The air smelled of brine and old rope. The gulls were busy and indifferent. Envied that. Back home I organized my quiet proof. I spread statements across the dining table and drew thin pencil lines between dates and amounts, the way my husband used to string twine on a map when he planned our road trips. A map of what should have been still and wasn't. I wrote down the names of every merchant Daniel's adjustments had touched, subscriptions I did not use, payments I had never made. Then I numbered them. Not because numbering would change the past, but because order is the only power left when someone has taken your consent. At 6:30 I ladled soup into a white tureen I reserve for winter. The bowl was chipped near the handle, a flaw I have grown to love. The doorbell rang at 7 on the dot. Daniel stepped in with a gust of evening air and a smile so familiar I almost forgot. He kissed my cheek too quickly and looked past me into the living room. "Looks cozy in here," he said, the way people praise a motel room when their reservation fell through. He ate neatly and praised the soup. He dabbed his mouth after each spoonful, the cloth napkin barely touching his lips. It was a small softness, his careful manners, that made my chest ache. After dishes, he suggested we do the boring stuff. He sat at the table where I had arranged my proofs. "Mom," he said, his voice light, "you always make it look like a courtroom. I promise it's not that serious." He reached for the most recent statement. His eyes flickered once, barely, but I noticed. He began talking in the tone he uses when he wants to guide me someplace I wouldn't go alone. "There were some short-term moves," he said. "You wouldn't want your funds sitting idle in a down cycle." I shifted a chunk into a higher yield instrument. "Totally reversible." "Reversible how?" I asked. "Just moves," he said. "You remember when you asked me to help after your surgery? Same thing. Convenience. Convenience is a hallway word. It takes you where you didn't intend to go. I poured us both tea and set his cup on a coaster he'd made in 3rd grade. Blue glaze thick as frosting, 3 fingerprints hardened forever in one corner. Do you recall asking me about this specific transfer? I tapped the line for 217,000. My voice didn't rise. It learned long ago that volume does not make people hear. He smiled, but his voice tightened. We talked in general terms, Mom. You told me to keep an eye on things. Keeping an eye, I said, is different from moving a hand. He exhaled through his nose, a sound that used to signal frustration over algebra. I'm trying to protect you. From what? From mistakes. He touched the bridge of his nose like it hurt. You don't read fine print, Mom. You never have. Look, this isn't an intervention. I just want to keep things smooth. You've always taken care of me. Let me take care of you. He meant it to land as love. It landed like a padded lock. I nodded as if I were considering a weather report. Thank you for dinner, he said finally, standing. He did not pick up a dish or ask what I needed from him. He hugged me at the door and said, We'll go through more next week. Then, as if offering a mint, Renee thinks you should get rid of that old car. Course she did. When the door closed, I wrote in my notebook. He called theft protection. Then I underlined it once. On Thursday I went to the branch office 2 towns over, the one in the old brick building that used to be a post office. A woman in a navy blazer greeted me by my first and last name, though I had never met her. We love taking care of our seniors, she said, all warmth and pearly teeth. I smiled back as if to say, yes, I have decided to be your category and not a person. Secondary account managers can be convenient, she said after I asked about revocation. Especially for family. And inconvenient, I said, when family mistakes manager for owner. Her smile softened just slightly. She pulled up my file and frowned. Yes, I see a series of reallocations. One option would be to set alerts requiring your confirmation. Another would be to reduce his access. Reduce, I repeated, trying the word in my mouth like a lemon slice. I'd like to change where my pension deposit lands. I slid across a tidy list. Credit union. New account. And I'll need a small safe deposit box. Her eyes flicked to me, then the screen. We can do that. She lowered her voice. Quietly. We completed the forms in a gentle hush, only interrupted by the soft burr of the printer. I signed my new name where it was necessary. My same name, I mean, but written with the hand of a woman who had learned to read a room again. She walked me to the vault where a young man with a silver tie gave me a box the size of a bread pan. I placed inside it 3 things: the title to my car, my marriage certificate, and the gold locket my husband gave me when Daniel was born. There was room for the leather notebook, but I kept it with me. Preferred the light. Outside, a school bus passed, near empty, carrying only 2 children and a driver who sang to herself. I stood until their voices faded. Then I walked to the credit union, opened the new account, and chose a PIN I had never used before. Felt like changing the lock on a diary. Back home I found a message from Renee. Hey Marjorie. Popping by Saturday to measure for the new shades. Daniel says you've been squinting when you read. Light control will help. We should also talk about streamlining your subscriptions. There are so many you don't use. Happy to take this off your plate. 2 hearts. There's a kind of cheer that sounds like a hand inside your purse. I responded. Saturday won't work. We'll be out. Slight fib. I did not owe them my whereabouts. I made coffee and sat at the small table by the window, where the first cold bruised the geraniums with a tenderness that felt cruel. I remembered Renee's first dinner at our house. She had brought a lemon tart and a candle that smelled like a hotel lobby. She had looked around my living room the way one looks at a rental unfit for an eventual vision and said, "Oh, your house has good bones." I should have understood then what role I would be asked to play. The structure you lean on while you renovate it out of recognition. That evening the phone rang. "Mom," Daniel said. "Renee mentioned you were at the bank?" "Yes," I replied. "Was anything I should know?" "You've known enough," I said gently. I heard him inhale, then decide to save his breath. Okay, he said. I'll swing by Saturday. We can finally tackle those magazines. They're out of control. He meant the neat stacks of Smithsonian and American Gardener I keep beneath the hall table, each issue read twice, sometimes 3 times, because there is a pleasure in returning to what you already know and finding a sentence you somehow missed. Saturday won't work, I said. For you or for us? For me. I hung up and wrote. I declined small invasions. On Friday, I opened the bottom drawer of the tallboy in my bedroom and took out the sweater I wore the day we drove Daniel to college. A brown cardigan with leather buttons that always looked happier in autumn. I pressed my face into it. It smelled of cedar and laundry soap and a note of something else. Perhaps the box itself, perhaps the memory of fear disguised as pride. My hand trembled slightly. I set the sweater on the bed, folded, ready. I cooked for myself that night without thinking. Eggs over medium, toast, tomatoes salted until they tasted like themselves. I ate slowly, listening to the tick of the kitchen clock and the ocean's steady breath behind it. Silence can sound like vacancy if you don't learn to hear its furniture. Before bed, I called the library and asked if they still needed volunteers for the Saturday book sale. We always do, the librarian said, relief warm in her voice. The boxes are heavy. I've carried heavier things, I said, but only to myself. I slept lightly and woke before dawn, while the bay was still soft as an unmade sheet. I made tea, wrapped my cardigan around my shoulders, and wrote at the top of a new page. Move incoming. Leave the rest behind. It was the first time the words admitted themselves. They did not come like a battle plan, but like weather. Something to be respected, worked with, survived. On my way out, I paused at the hallway photograph. The boy with the fish, the joy so unforced I wanted to press it against my ear and listen to the far-off place where it was still true. I know, I said to the picture, which is to say I spoke to both of us. Then I locked the door. Not the way you lock a house, but the way you close a chapter. Carefully, kindly, twice. The Saturday book sale smelled like dust and paper and the faint, comforting scent of coffee someone had smuggled in despite the library's rules. I arrived just as the volunteers were wheeling in the last of the cardboard boxes. Morning, Marjorie, called Evelyn from behind a table piled high with cookbooks. She's one of those women whose hair has been silver for so long you forget it was ever any other color. She wore a sweatshirt with a peeling lighthouse print and the kind of smile that doesn't dig for secrets. I signed my name on the volunteer sheet and tucked my leather notebook into the pocket of my cardigan. It was becoming a habit, keeping it close, as though the mere presence of truth written in my own hand could keep me steady. My job was to sort biographies. Felt fitting. Rows of lives reduced to dust jackets and blurbs, each promising the essence of a person in 300 pages or less. At 10 the doors opened. The first customers wandered in, quiet as churchgoers. A woman in a raincoat thumbed through the travel section, her lips moving silently as she read the spines. A boy no older than 12 lugged a stack of old Hardy Boys novels to the counter, his eyes wide like he'd stumbled into buried treasure. I found myself watching people's hands, the way they held what they valued, how some clutched their finds as though someone might snatch them away. I understood that grip. Around 11, Evelyn slid a paper cup of coffee in front of me. From the bakery across the street, she said. They had cinnamon rolls too, but I know you're not much for sweets. The kindness made my throat ache. I thanked her, sipped slowly, and let the warmth settle in my chest. It was then I saw Renee. She came in through the side door, wearing an oversized cream sweater that probably cost more than my monthly electric bill. She didn't see me at first. She was busy scanning the tables with a polite little wrinkle between her brows, as though the whole scene might be improved with a touch of her streamlining. When her eyes did land on me, her smile flickered, there and gone. She crossed the room quickly. Marjorie, I didn't know you volunteered here. I've been helping with the book sale for years, I said. My voice was even, my hand still sorting through a box of memoirs. She laughed lightly. I guess I never noticed. Well, I'm glad I caught you. Daniel and I have been talking about simplifying things for you. finances, household expenses. We'd love to help you downsize. There's no need to juggle so many accounts at your age. I placed a book on the table. Unbroken. The title felt almost too on the nose. I'm comfortable with the way things are, I said. Her smile tightened. Of course, but sometimes comfort is just habit. We want to make sure you're secure. Daniel's been managing things beautifully. I looked up then, met her eyes. I'm sure he thinks so. For a moment, something sharp flickered in her gaze. Then it was gone, replaced by the bright blandness she wore like perfume. Well, we'll talk more soon, she said. We're coming by next week to look at that car of yours. The maintenance costs. Picked up another book. Saturday won't work. She hesitated. Oh, well, we'll find another time. When she left, the air around the biography table felt cooler. I finished my shift in silence, my notebook a steady weight in my pocket. That night, I spread my rescued documents across the kitchen table again. Bank statements, pension records, receipts. A life translated into ink and numbers. I made a second notebook, this one for plans. Not just records but steps. Step 1. Separate all automatic payments from the joint account. Step 2. Redirect any correspondence to the P.O. box I'd kept from my antique shop days. Step 3. Consult an attorney, quietly. On Monday, I called an old client from my shop. A woman named Harriet who had once sold me a Louis XVI writing desk for half its worth, simply because she liked that I understood it. She was retired now, but her husband's cousin was an estate lawyer. We met Tuesday morning in a small office above a florist. The lawyer, Mr. Klein, was in his late 60s, with a neatly trimmed beard and the kind of eyes that had seen too much to be impressed by much of anything. Tell me, he said, folding his hands, exactly what you want. I want to remove any access my son has to my accounts. I want to protect my pension and any remaining investments from unauthorized use. And I want to do it without a fight that makes the papers. He nodded slowly. It can be done. But you'll need to move quickly and keep your intentions quiet. If he gets wind of this before it's complete, he could try to challenge you on competency grounds. I thought of Renee's casual remarks about light control for my reading, about downsizing, about habit versus comfort. I thought of the line in the bank statement. Transactions authorized by secondary account manager, Daniel B. Carter. I understand, I said. We spent 2 hours going over documents. I signed forms, authorized transfers, and created new passwords. I left the office feeling lighter, though I knew the real work was still ahead. Back home I made tea and sat by the window. The maple leaves had gone from gold to brittle brown almost overnight. Change can do that, arrive quietly then all at once. By evening the first protective measures were in place. The pension was now redirected to my new account. The joint account was restricted. And Daniel's access, while not yet revoked, was hanging by a thread only I could cut. I didn't feel triumphant. Felt steady. That night, as I washed the last teacup, I realized something. I wasn't preparing for a confrontation. I was preparing for departure. The two are not the same. I dried the cup, set it in its place, and wrote in my second notebook. When the time comes, leave without warning. Take only what is mine. Let them think they've won. The pen didn't shake in my hand. Outside, the wind rose, rattling the windows. Somewhere far off, a gull cried. A thin, aching sound that carried just far enough to be heard, but not answered. The wind off the bay had a way of carrying whispers from one end of town to the other. By Thursday morning, I knew that Daniel and Renee were telling people I was slowing down, that it was only a matter of time before I'd need more help with the little things. I let them talk. Words like that are seeds. They only grow if you tend them. I was too busy with my own garden. Mr. Klein had put me in touch with a discreet accountant, a woman named Simone who kept her office in the back of a stationery shop. She was the kind of person who noticed your shoes before your face, as if the way you walked told her more than your words ever could. I brought her my documents in 2 tidy envelopes. She flipped through each page slowly, her nail tapping at certain lines. "You've been generous," she said finally. "And they've mistaken that for permanence." The way she said it, it sounded almost like a diagnosis. Simone suggested we pull a complete credit report. Not just mine, but a search for any accounts opened in my name. The results came back in an hour. There they were, 2 credit cards I'd never used, both tied to an email address I didn't recognize, and a line of credit against the joint account. All opened within the last 9 months. "They were counting on you never checking," she said. I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes when the thing you feared most stops being a shadow and shows itself in the light. From there the steps moved faster. Simone froze the accounts. Mr. Klein prepared the revocation forms. The leather notebook filled with neat dates and times, each entry a quiet nail in the coffin of their trust. That afternoon, as I walked back from the post office, I passed the coffee shop where Daniel and I used to meet on Sunday mornings. Through the window I saw him. He was leaning across the table toward Renee, his expression somewhere between annoyed and pleading. She was tapping at her phone, shaking her head. I didn't linger. Whatever they were discussing, it wasn't my concern anymore. Not in the way it once had been. By Friday, everything was nearly ready. Only one piece remained. The decision of when. That evening I sat at my desk and wrote 3 words in the notebook. Soon. Very soon. I woke before dawn on Tuesday. The house was so still that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator from the other end of the hall. I made tea not for comfort but for ceremony. Today would be the day I cut the last threads. Mr. Klein met me at the credit union at 9 sharp. Simone joined us with a slim folder of final documents. "Once we do this," she said, "there's no going back without their cooperation." "That's the point," I replied. We signed the revocations in a small conference room with frosted glass walls. Each signature felt like reclaiming a room in my own home. By the end, Daniel and Renee had no legal access to any account, no authority to act on my behalf, no path back without my consent. From there we moved to the sale. The small condo on the edge of town, the one I'd quietly put a deposit on 3 weeks ago, was ready. It wasn't grand, but it had morning light in the kitchen and a view of the bay from the bedroom window. Best of all, it was mine, untouched by their hands. By noon, the movers had their instructions. Pack only the essentials, label every box with my initials, deliver directly to the condo. No forwarding address would be given to anyone but the post office. In the afternoon, I returned to the house one last time while it was still empty of noise. The living room looked exactly as it always had, yet it felt smaller, as if the walls themselves had been listening all these months and were tired of the story. I walked through each room slowly. The curtains I'd sewn. The chipped tureen. The framed photograph of Daniel at 9 with the fish. I left the photo on the mantel. Some things are better left as ghosts. Before I left, I placed my keys in a plain envelope on the kitchen counter. No note. No explanation. Let the absence speak. The first morning in the condo, I woke to the sound of gulls. The light came in soft and gold, spilling across the floor like it had been waiting for me. I made tea and carried it to the small balcony. The bay was calm, the surface broken only by the slow arc of a pelican diving for its breakfast. My phone buzzed once on the counter. I didn't check it. Whatever words waited there could not follow me here. I opened the leather notebook for the last time. On the final page I wrote, "Left with what is mine. Left them what they think is theirs. Kept my peace." Then I closed it and placed it in the desk drawer. The air smelled faintly of salt and the faint sweetness of the bakery downstairs. A woman on the sidewalk below was walking her dog, her scarf trailing behind her like a banner. The world had not ended. It had simply shifted its weight. I thought of the empty house across town, the envelope with the keys, the moment they would realize what had happened. There would be calls, maybe visits. But I owed no answers. For the first time in years, the future felt light enough to carry. I sipped my tea, watched the tide move in, and let the silence settle around me. Not the silence they had once counted on, but the kind I had chosen. And in that stillness I understood. They had not taken anything I wasn't willing to leave behind.